For nearly a century, Disney has defined what it means to be a princess. From Snow White's first steps onto the big screen in 1937 to Raya saving the world in 2021, these characters have inspired generations. But what exactly makes someone a Disney princess? Why are some of the most famous characters like Elsa or Megara left out of the official lineup? And how have these royal icons evolved from damsels in distress to leading ladies and heroes in their own right? Well, get comfy because today we are covering almost 100 years of Disney princesses, diving deep into the history, evolution, and how they impacted the general public. So prepare to explore the magic, the myth, and the surprising rules behind the Disney Princess brand. Before we jump into it though, a quick favor, if you're enjoying the content, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps a ton, especially since we're just getting started here. And remember, we want to make content that you want to see, whether it's Ben 10's aliens, Disney villains, or even the Shengong Wu from Shaolin Showdown. Drop your suggestions in the comments, and we might make it into a video. Let's not waste any more time with the YouTube stuff though, we have a ton of movies to get into, so let's get started. But first, let's talk about where the idea of a Disney princess even came from, because it's actually surprisingly interesting. While you might think the term is pretty straightforward, something along the lines of a Disney princess is simply a princess in a Disney movie, it's a bit more complicated than that. Because while Snow White is the earliest example of a Disney princess, the actual title Disney princess didn't exist until the 1990s. Disney Consumer Products, or DCP, is a branch of the Walt Disney Company that focuses on merchandising and branding their properties. They were established in 1986, and since then they have, and I quote, brought beloved brands and franchises into the daily lives of families and fans through products, from toys to t-shirts, apps, books, console games, and more. Essentially, they are the people who try to get you to spend as much money as possible on their properties by giving you more opportunities and methods to do so. And back in the 90s, they hit the mother lode by picking up on the growing demand for merchandise featuring the iconic heroines of animated films. Recognizing the immense potential, they officially launched the Disney Princess brand, transforming these beloved characters into a powerhouse franchise that would captivate audiences for generations. The mid-90s marked the first steps into branding the princesses as a unified group. Disney introduced themed doll collections such as Perfume Princess, Musical Princess, and Dancing Princess, and shifted away from marketing these characters individually. This was the Avengers of Disney movies. Well, I guess the Avengers are now the Avengers of Disney movies, but you know what I mean. Just like the Marvel superheroes did in the 2010s, the Disney princesses paved the way for a massive merchandising empire in the 1990s. In March of 1996, Walt Disney Records debuted Princess Collection, the first ever Disney Princess compilation album. This was a huge commercial success, climbing to number 4 on Billboard's Top Kid audio charts, which only further proved that the Princess brand resonated beyond the traditional toys and clothing that Disney was known for. The franchise's reach extended even further on June 24th of 1998 with the introduction of the Princess magazine in the UK. It boasted the slogan, "Every girl can be a princess," and the magazine launch was accompanied by a sweeping promotional campaign. This included partnerships with Mattel at Toys R Us and a cross-promotion for collectible stickers with Panini. What I'm trying to get at is that the princesses were everywhere. But now you gotta come back to that question of what exactly makes a Disney princess. And again, you might go to that idea of just being a princess in a Disney movie, but in actuality, that's not really the main requirement. In fact, many of the official Disney princesses aren't really royalty at all. While many princesses do have royal titles, not all of them are born into royalty. Snow White, Aurora, Ariel, Jasmine, Rapunzel, and Merida are daughters of kings or queens. And yes, that makes them princesses by birthright. And then we have characters like Pocahontas and Raya who are daughters of tribal leaders, and you could consider them royalty within their own cultures. Meanwhile, Cinderella, Belle, and Tiana ascend to royalty through marriage. But we get an interesting exception as we look at Mulan. She has no royal lineage. She does not marry into royalty, and yet she remains a part of the official lineup due to her extraordinary achievements. Her bravery and self-sacrifice earn her honor from the Emperor of China, elevating her status in a way that mirrors the traditional concept of nobility. So at least to some degree, it is clear that you don't need to have the official title of princess to be considered a Disney princess. Instead, Disney executives selected characters based on what they call the princess mythology, a blend of qualities, themes, and storytelling elements that align with the franchise's vision. This approach explains why Mulan, despite not being any kind of royalty, became a core member of the brand. Conversely, characters like Jane Porter from Tarzan, who have strong princess-like qualities, were ultimately excluded. On that note, up until the early 2000s, both Tinkerbell and Esmerelda were also briefly marketed as Disney princesses under the same mythology-driven criteria. However, Disney later reconsidered their inclusion, determining that they did not fully fit the brand's evolving identity. Tinkerbell in particular found a new home in 2005 as the face of her own successful franchise, Disney Fairies. This spin-off introduced an entire fairy universe, beginning with a book series by Gail Carson Levine, and later expanding into its own line of films, toys, and merchandise. Remember, this is all about every character making the most money possible, and that means putting them in the right position to market themselves. But what all goes into making that princess mythology? Although the Disney princesses come from different stories and time periods, they share several defining traits that tie them together as a cohesive group. These can more or less be considered requirements for fitting that princess mythology. One of the most recognized characteristics is their deep connection to nature, often demonstrated through their ability to communicate with animals. From Snow White's woodland friends to Moana's relationship with the ocean, and more importantly with Hei, these princesses demonstrate kindness towards all living creatures and the world around them. Interestingly, some of the shared qualities that used to be an absolute necessity for Disney princesses have actually been less consistent in the more modern entries. For example, growing up, it was just a fact that Disney princesses and singing went hand in hand. But now we have characters like Merida, who only sings as a child, or Raya, who only did some brief chanting to summon Sisu. What's interesting is that this seems to have been something that was picked up during the Disney Renaissance, and then since then has been tapering off.
Sorry, boys. I don't sing.
And finally, we have romance, probably the most iconic part of any Disney princess story. But again, in the more modern movies, we see characters like Merida, Moana, and Raya going on journeys of self-discovery rather than the usual lovey-dovey plots. And all of this brings us to a pretty important idea. What it means to be a Disney princess has hugely changed over the years. In fact, there's a pretty clear division of three distinct groups in the current lineup: the pre-Renaissance princesses, the Renaissance princesses, and the modern age. The earliest Disney princesses, Snow White, Cinderella, and Aurora, embody traditional elegance, grace, and romantic idealism. Their stories are shaped by external conflicts, often placing them in situations where they just have to endure hardship rather than actively combat it. However, their defining strengths lie in their kindness, resilience, and unwavering optimism. Also, 2 out of 3 times they tend to sleep, like, a lot. Then we have the princesses from the Disney Renaissance, which, by the way, if you're interested in a video on the Renaissance, let us know in the comments down below. We can do a deep dive if that's something you want to see. Anyways, this era brought a shift in characterization. Princesses like Ariel, Belle, Jasmine, Pocahontas, and Mulan were portrayed as being more proactive, adventurous, and independent. They actively pursued their dreams rather than waiting for fate to intervene. Their stories also reflected evolving cultural discussions on gender roles. For example, Ariel is warned by Ursula that women are better seen and not heard. Belle is belittled by Gaston for reading, and Mulan faces societal expectations that define a woman's worth through marriage. These films introduced princesses who questioned, challenged, and redefined their roles within their worlds. In the most recent generation, Tiana, Rapunzel, Merida, Moana, and Raya continue this evolution, introducing even more diverse and dynamic protagonists. Tiana is uniquely grounded in realism, valuing hard work over magic in her pursuit of success. Rapunzel, while idealistic like her predecessors, displays a balance of naivety and determination that sets her apart. Merida completely rejects the idea of marriage, something that is often pretty core to the princess experience to this point. Moana embarks on a hero's journey without a love interest, reaffirming that a princess's story doesn't need to revolve around romance. And Raya takes this one step further as she navigates through arguably the darkest world Disney has ever created, and ultimately learns to find hope through those around her. By this point, the damsel in distress trope is long gone. Instead, Disney is creating princesses who take charge of their own destinies, leading their stories as heroes rather than serving as prizes to be won. But to truly understand how we got here, we need to look back at each official Disney princess so that we can see how they helped to shape and reinvent the Disney princess formula over time. Before we can dive into their stories though, it's important to remember that the idea of a Disney princess as a franchise didn't exist until the 1990s. This means that the earlier princesses weren't created with a shared identity in mind. They were simply the protagonists of their own story. They were standing alone in their respective narratives. Snow White was just Snow White and not a part of a larger legacy or compared to other princesses. In contrast, later characters like Jasmine were introduced within a world where the Disney princess brand already existed. This inherently placed them in a broader context. So we do have to give a little bit more leeway when we're talking about older princesses. Speaking of, we're going to be starting all the way back at the beginning with Snow White. Released in 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was Disney's first full-length animated feature film and a groundbreaking achievement in cinema. The story follows Snow White, a young princess whose stepmother, the evil queen, becomes jealous of her beauty and orders a huntsman to kill her. However, the huntsman takes pity on her and allows Snow White to escape into the forest where she is befriended by a group of 7 dwarves. While living with these dwarves, Snow White assumes the role of a caretaker, bringing warmth and joy to their home. However, when the evil queen learns that Snow White is still alive, she disguises herself as an old hag and tricks her into eating a poisoned apple. Snow White then falls into a deep sleep, seemingly dead, until a prince revives her with a kiss and they ride off into the sunset. At the time of its release, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was nothing short of revolutionary, earning Walt Disney widespread acclaim and proving that animation could be more than just short cartoons. It was something that could tell deep, emotional, and immersive stories. Many people initially doubted whether audiences would sit through an entire animated movie, dismissing it as Disney's folly. But the film's breathtaking animation, heartfelt characters, and emotional storytelling won over viewers, turning it into a massive success. Snow White herself was adored by audiences, embodying the idealized feminine virtues of the time: grace, kindness, and unwavering optimism. She was viewed as the perfect fairy tale heroine, charming audiences with her innocence and gentle demeanor. However, looking back, it's pretty easy to understand modern critiques of her having a very passive role in her own story. I mean, she literally sets the standard for a damsel in distress when we talk about animated movies. She is someone who genuinely cannot save themselves and needs to wait for a literal Prince Charming to come and do it for her. But she also set the standard in many other ways as well by giving us several of the go-to characteristics for Disney princesses. She's got kindness and compassion, she has a strong connection to nature and animals, she has a great singing voice, she is graceful and elegant, and of course, she is tied to that classic idea of fairy tale romance. While later princesses would evolve beyond Snow White's passivity, her character provided the foundation upon which the Disney princess brand was going to be built. And her movie proved that audiences loved fairy tales, musicals, and heartfelt storytelling, which of course paved the way for Cinderella. Released in 1950, Cinderella was Disney's return to fairy tale princesses after more than a decade. Following World War II, the studio was in financial trouble, and Cinderella was a high-stakes gamble, one that paid off in a very big way, saving Disney and cementing the idea that princess movies were a reliable formula for them to use going forward. Cinderella is a young woman forced into servitude by her cruel stepmother and stepsisters after the death of her father. Despite their constant mistreatment, she remains kind, hopeful, and hardworking, believing that someday her life will change for the better. When the kingdom announces a royal ball where the prince will choose his bride, Cinderella dreams of attending. However, her stepmother sabotages her plans, destroying the dress that she worked so hard to make. Just when all seems lost, her fairy godmother appears, granting her a stunning gown, a carriage, and a time-sensitive enchantment that allows her to attend. At the ball, Cinderella captures the prince's heart, but at midnight the spell breaks, forcing her to quickly flee and causing her to leave behind a glass slipper. The next day, the prince orders a kingdom-wide search for the girl who fits the slipper. Cinderella's stepmother locks her away, trying to prevent her from being found, but with help from her animal friends, she manages to escape just in time. She then proves that she is the slipper's rightful owner and finally receives her happy ending. Cinderella was a major success, restoring Disney's reputation and reinforcing that audiences still loved fairy tale heroines. She was celebrated for her grace, kindness, and perseverance, with many seeing her story as a fantasy of hope and reward, something that is pretty appealing for an entire era worth of people who are struggling to get by. However, much like Snow White, modern audiences sometimes critique Cinderella for being passive and waiting for external forces to change her life. That said, she actually has more agency than people often remember. Unlike Snow White, who simply endures her hardship, Cinderella actively dreams for more and attempts to go to the ball on her own, and most importantly, fights back in her own way. When she is locked up, she doesn't wait to be rescued, she works with her animal friends to orchestrate her escape, proving that she isn't entirely reliant on a prince. Cinderella shows off a lot of similar traits to Snow White, however, there is a definite shift towards showing that she has more inner strength to her character. She is a much more active agent in her own story, and her determination and quick thinking allow her to escape her stepmother's grasp. Even though people often comment on the prince swooping in with her slipper and setting her free, she still had to get herself to that position, and the entire movie is her earning that moment. Of note though, Cinderella also makes a pretty big step forward towards another common Disney princess trope, the animal companion. In the case of Snow White, she had a connection to all of nature and animals in general, but Cinderella has a very specific set of animals that she is tied to, each with their own names and personalities, which gives them a lot more character. While Cinderella is far from the proactive heroine of later Disney films, she does represent a clear step forward. Sure, Snow White is definitely the original Disney princess, but I would argue that Cinderella was the one who set the gold standard moving forward. Between Snow White and Cinderella, nearly 20 years had passed, but with the clear success of princesses, Disney was much more enthusiastic to make another one, which is why only 7 years later, in 1957, they released Sleeping Beauty. This was Disney's most ambitious animated film to date. It featured stunning, medieval-inspired visuals, a Tchaikovsky-influenced score, and the studio's first widescreen presentation. However, despite the artistic achievement, the film underperformed at the box office, ultimately leading Disney to step away from fairy tale princesses for the next 30 years. Sleeping Beauty stars Aurora, the universally beloved princess of her kingdom. However, at her christening, the sorceress Maleficent curses her, saying that on her 16th birthday she will prick her finger on a spinning wheel and fall into an eternal sleep. To protect their daughter, Aurora's parents send her away to be raised in secrecy by 3 good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. She grows up completely unaware of her royal lineage, living a peaceful, isolated life in the forest. On the day of her 16th birthday, she encounters Prince Philip, and the two share an instant connection. However, before this gets too far, the fairies reveal her true identity and take her back to the castle. Unfortunately, Maleficent tricks Aurora into fulfilling the curse. She pricks her finger, falls into an enchanted sleep, and leaves Philip as the one who needs to take action. With the help of the fairies, the prince battles Maleficent, who transforms into a dragon, before she is ultimately defeated. Philip then awakens Aurora with true love's kiss, and they live happily ever after. Aurora was met with mixed reception at the time. While the film itself was praised for its breathtaking animation and iconic villain, Aurora wasn't the star of her own movie. She only has about 18 minutes of screen time, and after pricking her finger, she doesn't do anything for the rest of the film. Much like Snow White, Aurora is more of a symbol than a character. She represents beauty, grace, and innocence, but has little agency in her own story. Even comparing her to Cinderella, who actively tried to change her situation, makes you see just how much Aurora is entirely swept along by fate and other characters' decisions. On top of that, Aurora is our first princess to not really bring anything new to the table. Her story feels way too similar to Snow White's, her personality is completely cookie cutter, and the movie is just idealistic romanticism. It's a lot of what we've already seen before, and Sleeping Beauty just doesn't reinvent the spinning wheel in any way that made an impact. Because of her limited screen time and passive role, Aurora is often considered to be the least developed Disney princess of all time. However, the film did have one thing going for it that has kept Aurora relevant, and that is Maleficent. While Aurora herself isn't exactly popular, people love Maleficent. Heck, she even became a major and recurring figure in the Kingdom Hearts series, which is what I know her from because I didn't watch this movie until way later in life. That said, Aurora did lead to one major change to the Disney princess formula. Her lack of agency set the stage for change. She had been such a disappointment to audiences that when Disney returned to fairy tales in the Disney Renaissance, they knew that their next princess had to be more than just a beautiful, passive figure waiting to be rescued. And that brings us to the Little Mermaid's Ariel. When The Little Mermaid debuted in 1989, over 3 decades later, it marked the beginning of the Disney Renaissance, a new era of animated films with more dynamic storytelling, stronger characters, and Broadway-style musical numbers. Ariel was unlike any Disney princess before her, bold, rebellious, and willing to take risks to achieve her goal. She didn't wait for things to happen, she made them happen, even if that wasn't always the best idea. Her arrival redefined what it meant to be a Disney princess, setting the stage for the more proactive princesses that followed. Ariel was a 16-year-old mermaid princess with an insatiable curiosity for the human world. Fascinated by life above the ocean, she collected human artifacts and longed to be part of that world. However, her father, King Triton, strictly forbids contact with humans, believing that it would be dangerous. One night, Ariel rescues Prince Eric from a shipwreck and falls in love with him, and desperate to be with him, she makes a deal with the sea witch Ursula, trading her voice for legs. Ariel then has 3 days to make Eric fall in love with her, or she will belong to Ursula forever. Despite struggling without a voice, Ariel actually manages to win Eric's affection. However, Ursula interferes using her magic to disguise herself and tricks Eric into almost marrying her. In the final battle, Ariel fights back alongside Eric and her friends, ultimately helping to defeat Ursula. In the end, King Triton sees Ariel's love for Eric and grants her wish permanently, allowing her to live as a human. Ariel is a game changer. Audiences loved her spirited personality, her determination, and her emotional depth. She was the first Disney princess to really feel like a fully realized character, with flaws, desires, and agency. Unlike her predecessors, Ariel didn't just dream of a better life, she actively chased after it. However, some criticize Ariel's romantic motivations, arguing that she gave up her voice for a man. While her love for Eric was a key factor, the film makes it clear that Ariel's dream of living on land existed long before she met him. Eric is an extension of her desire for freedom, not the sole reason for her transformation. Ariel was unique and spirited. She had a heavy hand in both the story's path and its resolution, and she was much more expressive and relatable, which made her feel like a tangible person. However, the most important difference between Ariel and her predecessors was that she had flaws. She made mistakes, she learned, she grew. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't some trophy that was nice to look at. She was a living, breathing part of the world, and that allowed her to connect with the audience in a much stronger way. She marked a turning point for Disney princesses. She proved that princesses could be active protagonists capable of making choices, taking risks, and driving their own narratives. Ariel's successes reshaped Disney animation. Without Ariel, there would be no Disney Renaissance as we know it. And with her success, Disney was more than ready to introduce another groundbreaking princess in the Beauty and the Beast's Belle. While there had been over 30 years between the last two princesses, Beauty and the Beast's Belle stepped onto the scene only 2 years later in 1991. It took Disney's storytelling to a whole new level, blending romance, adventure, and musical numbers into an animated feature that felt more sophisticated than anything before it. And Belle was at the center of that transformation. She wasn't just another princess focused on beauty. She was someone who valued knowledge, independence, and inner strength over superficiality. She wasn't just a dreamer, she was a thinker, an innovator, and the first Disney princess to openly challenge societal expectations about what a woman's role should be. Belle was a young woman living in a small provincial town where her love for books and curiosity about the world set her apart from the other villagers. While they see her as odd, Belle dreams about adventure beyond the simple life expected of her. She is pursued by the arrogant hunter Gaston, who wants to marry her because she is beautiful, but she rejects him, unwilling to settle for a life where she is only valued for her looks. When her father, Maurice, becomes lost in the woods and is imprisoned by the Beast, Belle selflessly takes his place, agreeing to stay in the castle forever if he gets to go free. Though initially frightened by the Beast's temper, she soon begins to see beyond the monstrous appearance, recognizing both his kindness and his pain. Over time, Belle's influence helps the Beast learn compassion, patience, and love, leading to a mutual bond between them. When Gaston leads the village to attack the castle, Belle actively fights to protect the Beast, proving her love for him just as he is mortally wounded. Her love ultimately breaks his curse, restoring the Beast and his servants to their human forms, and in the end, Belle finds the adventure that she was looking for not in distant lands, but in a journey of understanding and love. Belle was an instant favorite amongst the audience, particularly young girls who resonated with her intelligence, independence, and refusal to conform. Unlike earlier princesses, Belle was not defined by romance. Her story is about personal growth, compassion, and learning to see beyond appearances. Both critics and fans praised her for being more modern and proactive than the princesses before her. She was also the first Disney princess to explicitly be framed as intelligent, with her love for books playing a key role in her character. Sure, there had been moments of the princesses being clever before, but Belle being smart wasn't a momentary thing, it was just who she was. However, some later critiques emerged regarding her relationship with the Beast, romanticizing Stockholm Syndrome, but while Belle does show kindness to the Beast, she never excuses his behavior and only begins to care for him once he treats her with respect. So at least to me, those claims don't really hold too much weight. Belle took Ariel's newfound independence and elevated it to an intellectual and emotional level. She wasn't just rebellious, she was thoughtful, open-minded, and compassionate in a way that challenged the people around her. Where past princesses waited for change or ran towards it impulsively, Belle created change through her actions and her beliefs. She rejected both Gaston's controlling advances and the Beast's initial hostility, demanding to be treated as an equal in all of her relationships. Beauty and the Beast became the first animated film to be nominated for the Best Picture at the Academy Awards, proving that Disney's storytelling had evolved into something truly prestigious. This completely reinforced Disney's belief that the audience was looking for more complex and intelligent heroines, and motivated them to stay on this track moving into our next princess, Jasmine. When Aladdin premiered in 1992, it introduced audiences to Jasmine, a princess who was very different from those who came before her in a crucial way. Let's listen to that movie title again. Aladdin. For the first time in Disney princess history, the princess was not the protagonist. Unlike the previous princesses, Jasmine was a part of someone else's adventure, but that didn't mean that she lacked agency. In fact, Jasmine was one of the most outspoken and independent princesses yet, challenging both the traditions of her kingdom and the expectations that were placed upon her. She wasn't waiting to be rescued, nor was she longing for a prince. Jasmine's story was about breaking free from a life where she had no control. Jasmine was the daughter of the Sultan of Agrabah. As a royal, she was expected to marry a prince by law, but she refused to be treated like a prize that needed to be won. Frustrated by her lack of freedom, she disguised herself and sneaks out of the palace to experience the real world for the first time. While in the marketplace, she meets Aladdin, a street rat with a good heart, and their connection is immediate, but before anything can happen, Jasmine is forced back into her royal life. Meanwhile, Jafar, the Sultan's vizier, seeks to manipulate Jasmine's fate by controlling both the kingdom and her future. When Aladdin re-enters her life as Prince Ali, Jasmine quickly realizes that something is off. Unlike past princesses who have a pretty bad track record of being fooled by magic, Jasmine is intelligent and observant, and because of that, she recognizes Aladdin's true identity before he admits it. While she is not the film's main hero, Jasmine is a key player in defying Jafar's control and in fighting for her own choices. In the end, her father sees her strength and changes the law, allowing Jasmine to marry whomever she chooses. And boom, just like that, 3 back-to-back home runs for Disney. Jasmine quickly became yet another fan favorite, especially for viewers who appreciated her strong will, her confidence, and her refusal to accept a life that she didn't choose. She was seen as a more assertive and modern princess, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. However, because Aladdin focused on, well, Aladdin, Jasmine wasn't given as much screen time or personal development as characters like Ariel or Belle were. Some critics felt that she was underutilized, serving more as a love interest than a fully realized protagonist, but even so, her impact in the movie is undeniable. She was the first Disney princess to openly reject being a passive prize, ultimately making her a very important step forward for this group of characters. But despite rejecting that path, Jasmine's role wasn't about breaking free from love, it was about breaking free from expectation. Instead of dreaming of a prince or a better life, what Jasmine dreamed of was freedom, making her motivations entirely different from those before her. She was also by far the most outspoken and self-assured princess yet. While Ariel and Belle were rebellious in their own ways, Jasmine was the first to directly challenge authority, speaking out against the laws and traditions that tried to control her. Her ability to see past social status, falling for Aladdin despite him being a street rat, also reinforced the theme of looking beyond appearances, a message that was carried over from Beauty and the Beast. Jasmine proves that a Disney princess didn't have to be the main character to be powerful. She may not have been the star of Aladdin, but she left a lasting impression as a bold, intelligent, and independent character. Notably, Jasmine also represents something else for Disney princesses as well, as she was the first non-white member of the group. And taking things even one step further into our own world, Aladdin is the first Disney princess story that was not adapted from existing European fairy tales or stories. This showed Disney that the audience was excited to see representation from other cultures. And sure, a lot of Aladdin is a bit of a caricature and plenty of it misses the mark, but at the very least, it represented a step in a new direction which was impactful enough to be carried through to many of the next films to be released. For example, Pocahontas. When Pocahontas premiered in 1995, we saw another big change as Disney took a more dramatic and serious approach to its storytelling, moving away from fairy tales and into historical fiction. Pocahontas, unlike any other princess before her, was wise, mature, and deeply connected to nature in a way that felt unique. The film attempted to tell a romanticized version of the encounter between English settlers and the Powhatan people, with Pocahontas serving as a bridge between the two worlds. Pocahontas was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, making her a princess in her own right. She was free-spirited and adventurous, preferring to explore the wilderness rather than settle down into traditional life as was expected of her. When the English settlers, led by Governor Ratcliffe, arrived in the New World, Pocahontas encountered John Smith, a soldier who was fascinated by her world. Despite the tensions between their people, the two form a bond, and Pocahontas teaches Smith about the importance of harmony and respect for the land. As conflict brews between her tribe and the English, Pocahontas is caught in the middle. When her father captures John Smith and prepares to execute him, she bravely intervenes, stopping the violence and convincing her people to seek peace instead. In the end, however, the settlers still choose war, and John Smith is wounded. Unlike many Disney romances, when John Smith leaves, Pocahontas chose not to leave with him, instead wanting to stay with her people, marking one of the most bittersweet endings in Disney princess history. Upon its release, Pocahontas was met with mixed reactions. Many praised it for its gorgeous animation, emotional depth, and mature themes, while others criticized its historical liberties and inaccuracies. And I have my degree in history. This is a rough watch if you are comparing it to what actually happened. To put it lightly, it spits on the tragedy that happened to the real Pocahontas. At the time, some indigenous groups and historians objected to how Disney romanticized the real-life Pocahontas' story, as the actual Pocahontas was roughly 10 to 12 at the time when she met John Smith, and their relationship was not a love story. It was closer to a horror, really. However, despite this, for many viewers, Pocahontas was an inspiring and powerful figure. She was the first Disney princess to directly tackle themes of colonialism, prejudice, and environmentalism, and her story emphasized the importance of peace and understanding between different cultures. This style of independence and her refusal to follow a traditional romance definitely set her apart from her predecessors. Pocahontas marked a significant shift in the Disney princess lineup. While previous princesses had faced personal struggles, Pocahontas' conflict was bigger than herself. She was caught in the middle of a war and had to make a choice that would affect her entire people. She was not driven by personal dreams like Ariel or Belle. Instead, her journey was about responsibility, leadership, and the need to make a difference in the world. She was also, ironically, the most mature and serious princess up to that point. Unlike the youthful energy of Ariel or Jasmine, Pocahontas was calm, contemplative, and wise beyond her years. This, in combination with her connection to nature, spiritual beliefs, and willingness to stand up for peace, made her a very unique role model within the Disney princess franchise. Despite its controversies, Pocahontas remains a landmark film in Disney history, while Pocahontas herself introduced a new kind of princess, one whose story was deeply tied to history, culture, and more serious themes. While later films would refine Disney's approach on historical fiction, Pocahontas' influence can definitely be seen in future princesses like Moana, who also embodies a deep connection to her land and to her people. This film paved the way for more complex storytelling, which we would see in the next Disney princess, Mulan. By the time Mulan premiered in 1998, the Disney princess lineup had already shifted towards stronger, more independent heroines. But Mulan took that concept to an entirely new level. She wasn't a princess by title or by marriage, she was a warrior, a strategist, and a hero who saved an entire nation as she defied gender and societal norms and demonstrated that nobility wasn't just for the nobles. Mulan was a young woman struggling to fit into the rigid expectations of her culture. As a daughter in a traditional family, she was expected to marry well and bring honor to her household. However, after an embarrassing failure at the matchmakers, Mulan begins to feel like she will never live up to what is expected of her. Which is an interesting contrast to characters like Jasmine, where Jasmine struggled to go against tradition, Mulan was struggling to meet the expectations of her traditions. When the Huns invade China, the emperor issues a decree that one man from every family must join the army. Mulan's father, an older and injured war veteran, is the only male in her family, meaning he must fight despite his condition. Unable to stand by and watch him march to his likely death, Mulan disguises herself as a man and takes his place in the army, knowing that discovery would mean her execution. Under the alias Ping, Mulan trains alongside her fellow soldiers, struggling at first but eventually proving herself through her determination and her ingenuity. Along the way, she befriends Captain Li Shang, who does respect her strength and creativity, though he doesn't yet know her secret. During a battle in the mountains, Mulan cleverly triggers an avalanche, wiping out the Han army and saving her entire battalion. But in the process, she is wounded and her true identity is revealed. Rather than executing her, Shang spares her life, but she is cast out for her deception. However, Mulan then discovers that the Huns survived and plan to attack the Emperor. She rushes to the Imperial City to warn everyone, but when no one listens, she has to take matters into her own hands, using her intelligence and quick thinking to defeat the Hun leader and save China. For her bravery, the Emperor personally honors Mulan and even offers her a prestigious position in his court. But instead, she chooses to return home and bring honor to her family through forging her own path. Mulan was widely praised for its empowering message, strong protagonist, and breathtaking animation. Audiences loved how Mulan broke the mold of traditional Disney princesses, proving that heroism was not limited to fairy tales or love stories. She was a princess who fought battles and outwitted her enemies and saved an empire, a far cry from the damsel in distress archetype that had once defined the Disney princess brand. Mulan shattered expectations by proving that a princess doesn't have to be a royal to be legendary. She had no birthright to a throne, no reliance on a prince to save her, and no magical abilities. Though, admittedly, she did have a dragon and a debatably lucky cricket at her side, so that does, I guess, count. Regardless, her story was also unique because it was not a romance. Sure, there is clearly something between Mulan and Shang, but it remains secondary to the larger narrative. The film's focus is on self-discovery, honor, and breaking free from social limitations, a theme that would later influence characters like Moana, Merida, and Raya. But maybe most importantly, Mulan wasn't a princess because of birth or marriage, she was a princess because of her actions. She earned her place as a Disney princess through heroism, something that Disney recognized to be just as valid as a royal title. And also it made them a lot of money. Mulan proved that the definition of a Disney princess was evolving. No longer were princesses confined to castles or grand romances. They could swing swords, outsmart their enemies, and change the course of history. Speaking of changing history, before we move on, I do want to mention two other Disney princesses very briefly. Both Tinkerbell and Esmerelda were once considered to be official Disney princesses. However, by 2005, they were ultimately removed from the lineup, largely due to marketing decisions. So, as much as I would love to talk about them, they don't officially make the cut. Like I said at the top, Tinkerbell found her own success in her own franchise, but Esmerelda largely fell to the wayside, which is a shame because again she showed off some kind of representation, which was largely what Disney seemed to be going for at the time. Regardless, skipping over them, we are going all the way to 2009, when Disney introduced the first addition to their princess roster in nearly a decade and a half, Tiana. By the time The Princess and the Frog hit theaters in 2009, Disney princesses had long been evolving beyond the passive damsels of the early years. However, Tiana brought something entirely new to the table. A princess whose defining trait wasn't magic or royalty or rebellion, it was just sheer determination and hard work. Unlike the others, who dreamed of romance or adventure, Tiana's dream was practical and personal. She wanted to build something of her own, proving that a princess doesn't need a crown to be extraordinary. Set in 1920s New Orleans, the film follows Tiana, a young woman with a relentless work ethic and a lifelong dream of opening up her own restaurant. She was inspired by her late father, who believed in the power of perseverance. She juggles multiple jobs and tirelessly saves every penny to make her dream a reality. Unlike many Disney princesses before her, Tiana isn't waiting for fate, magic, or a prince to change her life. She is making it happen herself. However, she is outbid on the property for her restaurant, and it seems like all of her work will have been for nothing. This is when she crosses paths with Prince Naveen, a spoiled, penniless royal who has been turned into a frog by the sinister Dr. Facilier, which, quick side note, what a fantastic villain. Anyways, desperate to break the curse, Naveen mistakes Tiana for a princess and convinces her to kiss him, thinking that it will reverse the spell. Instead, Tiana is also transformed into a frog, sending both of them on a journey through the bayou in hopes of finding a way to become human. Throughout their adventure, Tiana begins to realize that while ambition and hard work are crucial, happiness isn't just about success. It's about love and friendship and balance. Eventually, they return to New Orleans, where Tiana defeats Dr. Facilier, learns to embrace love, and kisses Naveen, this time as his wife, making her a true princess and breaking the spell. In the end, she achieves both her dreams. She finds love, but does it on her terms, and is also able to open up her restaurant, Tiana's Palace. Tiana broke new ground as the first princess to be defined by their work ethic rather than a traditional fairy tale dream. While previous princesses often longed for love, adventure, or freedom, Tiana was motivated by a deep personal and practical goal, one that had nothing to do with finding a prince or even romance in general. Her story introduced a much more realistic perspective on achieving dreams. Unlike Cinderella, whose fortune changes through magic, or Ariel, who sacrifices a part of herself for love, Tiana teaches that success isn't handed to you, it is earned. She works tirelessly to make her restaurant a reality, and even after she falls in love, her ambitions remain a central part of her identity. After a pretty long hiatus between Mulan and Tiana, Disney was back in the princess game, and the next year we saw Tangled's Rapunzel in 2010. At this point, Disney was in the midst of a major transition. The studio was shifting towards computer-generated animation, and its approach to storytelling had to evolve alongside it. Rapunzel marked a new era for Disney princesses, one that balanced classic fairy tale charm with modern humor, action, and self-discovery. Tangled follows Rapunzel, a princess with magical golden hair that can heal wounds and prevent aging. As a baby, she is kidnapped by Mother Gothel, a woman who wants to use her magic to stay young forever. Gothel raises Rapunzel in a secluded tower, convincing her that the outside world is dangerous and that she can only stay safe there. Despite her isolation, Rapunzel dreams of venturing outside, especially after noticing mysterious floating lanterns that appear every year on her birthday. Eventually, Flynn Rider, a charismatic thief, stumbles into her tower while escaping from the royal guards. Rapunzel seizes the opportunity, blackmailing him into taking her to see the lanterns and setting off on a journey together that will change everything she knows about herself. Along the way, Rapunzel discovers her own strength, outsmarts danger, and slowly realizes that Mother Gothel's love was nothing more than manipulation and control. She also learns that she is the lost princess of the kingdom, and her dreams of seeing the lanterns was actually the world calling her back home. The climax of Tangled is one of the most intense in Disney princess history. Flynn sacrifices himself to free Rapunzel from Mother Gothel, cutting her hair so that Gothel can no longer use her magic. Rapunzel's powers vanish, but her tears, imbued with the last remnants of her magic, enable her to save Flynn and allow them to reclaim their rightful place in the kingdom. When Tangled debuted, it was praised for its breathtaking animation, witty humor, and modern take on a classic princess story. Rapunzel in particular was a major hit with audiences, as she blended the optimism and grace of classic princesses with the energy, agency, and humor of more modern heroines. But more importantly, Rapunzel was the first princess whose story was framed like a modern action-adventure film. While previous princesses had been active in their own ways, Rapunzel's journey felt more like an epic quest than a traditional fairy tale, something we will definitely see returning when we talk about Moana and Raya. She escapes her tower, she fights off bandits, swings from cliffs, and even wields a deadly frying pan as a weapon. Rapunzel strikes a perfect balance between the old and the new. She had the wide-eyed innocence and romanticism of early princesses, but in no way does she feel helpless. She has the independence and character growth of the newer princesses, but she never has to lose her sense of optimism or hopefulness to achieve those goals. And all of that combines to make her one of the most endearing and relatable princesses in the franchise. Now, moving on to 2012 with another pretty important first. While Rapunzel was our first CGI princess, Brave's Merida was our first Pixar princess, and with her came one of the most radical departures from the Disney princess formula. Merida wasn't a princess seeking any kind of romance, adventure, or even self-discovery in the traditional sense. Instead, she was a headstrong warrior fighting against the very idea of what a princess was supposed to be. Set in medieval Scotland, Brave follows Merida of Clan Dunbroch, who absolutely hates the expectations being placed on her. Her mother, Queen Eleanor, insists that as a princess, she must marry one of the noble suitors from other clans to maintain peace. But Merida has no interest in marriage, especially not so early in life. In an act of defiance, she competes for her own hand in marriage, humiliating the suitors and sparking a massive conflict. Desperate to change her fate, she encounters a witch and begs for a spell that will change her mother. However, instead of altering Eleanor's mind, the spell alters her body and turns her into a bear. Now, Merida must find a way to reverse the curse before her mother is lost forever, all while keeping her from being hunted by the clans. Through this journey, Merida comes to understand her mother's perspective, and Eleanor learns to accept Merida's independence. Their recognition ultimately resolves the conflict, not through a grand adventure or an epic battle, but through mutual understanding and love. When Brave was released, Merida was celebrated as a refreshing break from the traditional princess archetype. She broke nearly every established rule of what it meant to be a Disney princess. First and foremost, she was the first princess to outright reject marriage, not just for herself, but seemingly as an expectation altogether. Unlike past princesses who found love as part of their journey, Merida never expresses interest in romance at all. Her personality also marked a significant shift. Where previous princesses balanced strength with grace, Merida was loud, stubborn, and aggressive. She wasn't a careful planner like Mulan, she wasn't a dreamer like Rapunzel, she was impulsive, reckless, and driven purely on emotion, which really made her feel distinct. Another key difference was the film's central relationship. Instead of focusing on love or self-discovery, Brave was all about the bond between a mother and daughter. This was the first Disney princess film to put a mother-daughter dynamic at its core, exploring the tensions between generational expectations and personal freedom. Even on the battlefield, Merida stands apart. While Mulan fought out of necessity and Rapunzel was defending herself when needed, Merida actively seeks out competition and battle. In fact, she is the first Disney princess to have a weapon as a core part of her identity. Ultimately, though, Merida was a huge step forward for Disney princesses, proving that a princess's story didn't need to involve romance, a prince, or even a traditional adventure to be compelling. However, her inclusion into the official Disney princess lineup wasn't without controversy. In 2013, Disney attempted to redesign Merida to match the more traditional princess aesthetic, giving her a slimmer figure, removing her bow, and taming her wild curls. This led to major backlash with fans, and even Brave's original director Brenda Chapman criticizing Disney for undermining the very qualities that made Merida unique. Due to this public outcry, Disney reversed the redesign and kept Merida's original look, which is definitely for the better. Merida's success paved the way for even more independent and self-reliant princesses, including Moana and Raya. She proved that a princess doesn't need romance, which is very clear as we go into those next two movies. But before moving on to Moana, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Frozen, the biggest Disney princess movie that technically isn't a Disney princess movie. Released in 2013, Frozen became an instant global phenomenon, shattering box office records and cementing Elsa and Anna as two of Disney's most recognizable characters. Despite both being princesses by birth, neither Elsa nor Anna were ever officially added to the Disney princess lineup, which seems weird. So why? Well, the simple answer is branding. By the time Frozen was released, Disney had realized that the Disney Princess franchise didn't need to absorb every new princess into the official lineup. Especially in the case that it was a movie that could stand on its own, there would be no reason that they would need to be put in the official Disney princesses. In many ways, they look at this group almost like a life raft for modern movies. And Frozen was massive. Instead of joining the Disney Princess franchise, Elsa and Anna became the faces of their own self-sustaining Frozen franchise, with their own merch, spin-offs, and even a sequel released in theaters, something that no other Disney princess movie has ever received before, which sounds wrong, but apparently it's not. Essentially, Elsa and Anna were just too big to be Disney princesses. While other characters like Merida, Moana, and Raya were added to the lineup to strengthen their brand, Frozen was already strong enough to stand on its own. I actually find it super interesting, but let me know your thoughts on that in the comments down below. But with that out of the way, let's move on to Moana, the next official Disney princess, and the first one to never mention romance at all. With the release of my personal favorite movie on this list, Moana, in 2016, Disney continued to push the boundary of what it meant to be a Disney princess. Moana wasn't just a leader in the making, she was a wayfinder, a chosen hero whose story revolved around cultural heritage, duty, and self-discovery. Moana is the daughter of a chief who is destined to lead her people. From a young age, she is drawn to the ocean, but her father forbids her from venturing beyond the reef, believing that their people should stay safely on their island. Kind of a reverse Little Mermaid almost. However, when their food supply begins to dwindle and their way of life is threatened, Moana embarks on a journey to restore balance to the world by returning the heart of Te Fiti. Her quest leads her to Maui, a shape-shifting demigod. Together they navigate the ocean, facing monsters, self-doubt, and the realization that Moana's true strength comes from embracing both her heritage and the voice of her own heart. By the end, she doesn't need a prince or even Maui to save the day. Instead, she defeats Te Kao not with violence, but with compassion, returning Te Fiti's heart and restoring life to the world. From the moment of its release, Moana was widely praised as one of Disney's strongest modern princess films. It had stunning animation, a powerful soundtrack, and extremely emotional storytelling. Moana marked a continuation in the shift away from traditional princess narratives, solidifying a new Disney heroine archetype, the self-sufficient leader on a grand hero's journey. For the first time, a Disney princess's story was not about self-discovery in a personal sense, but instead in a cultural one. Moana's arc wasn't about proving herself or finding her place, it was about reconnecting with her heritage and restoring what her people had lost. Unlike Ariel, who longed for a world beyond her own, or Belle, who looked for adventure outside of her small town, Moana's greatest discovery came from within her own history. Additionally, Moana has no romantic subplots whatsoever. While previous princesses like Merida had rejected marriage, Moana was the first princess whose story was completely devoid of romance from the very beginning. There is no prince. There is no love interest. They don't even bring up the idea of one in this movie. Her journey was just about bravery and responsibility. There was no need to tie her to a man in a romantic way. Her film's success also reinforced Disney's commitment to cultural representation, paving the way for future films like Raya, The Last Dragon, and Encanto. Speaking of which, next up is our final princess on this list, Raya, who took Moana's themes of leadership and responsibility in an even more action-driven direction. After Moana's success, it would take another 5 years for Disney to introduce a new princess, Raya, the fearless warrior of Raya and the Last Dragon. Unlike the fairy tale-inspired settings of most Disney princess films, Raya and the Last Dragon takes place in a world that has already fallen apart. Kumandra was once a prosperous land where humans and dragons coexisted, but centuries before the film's events, an evil force known as the Droon turned the dragons to stone and left the land divided into 5 warring nations: Fang, Heart, Tail, Spine, and Talon. Raya's father, the chief of the Heart tribe, dreamt of reuniting Kumandra. He believed that the key to restoring peace is bringing the other tribes together, but his efforts to foster unity ended in betrayal. A young Raya placed her trust in Namaari, the princess of Fang, who ultimately deceived her and led to the shattering of the Dragon Gem, a powerful artifact that kept the Droon at bay. With the gem broken, the Droon returned, and Raya's father and countless others were turned to stone. Fast forward 6 years, and Raya has become a hardened warrior, traveling across Kumandra in search of the last surviving dragon, Sisu. She hopes that with the dragon's help, she can restore the world. However, even after finding Sisu, Raya quickly learns that simply defeating the Droon won't be enough. She must confront her own trust issues, rebuild bridges with the people who betrayed her, and find a way to reunite the land that has spent centuries at war. Raya's story is deeply rooted in themes of trust, unity, and redemption, but at the same time the film has a bit of a darker tone than any Disney princess film before it, making her one of the most mature and duty-driven protagonists in the franchise. In the over 80 years since Snow White, the Disney princess identity has evolved significantly, and Raya reflects that change. She is the first Disney princess to be a full-fledged action hero, wielding a sword, mastering martial arts, and actively fighting enemies throughout her journey. We saw similar things with Merida, but her archery skills were an expression of her self-identity and freedom. For Raya, her ability to fight is a necessity, a part of how she fits into the world, and because of that, it reinforces her role as a warrior rather than just a rebellious royal. Additionally, Raya's character arc is unique in that it focuses on emotional growth rather than external obstacles. While previous princesses have battled villains or overcome societal expectations, Raya's biggest challenge is learning to trust again. Her world is divided, and so is she. Her journey is not about proving herself or achieving a dream, but about rebuilding relationships and restoring peace. Raya represents the most modern iteration of a Disney princess, one who is independent, powerful, and emotionally complex. She stands as proof that Disney's idea of what makes a princess is evolving, and that even nearly a century after Snow White, there are still plenty of ways to innovate on the princess stories that Disney wants to tell. And with that, we have covered nearly the entire history of Disney princesses, from Snow White setting the foundation in 1937 to Raya redefining what it means to be a princess in 2021. Along the way, we've seen them evolve from damsels in distress to heroes in their own rights, pushing boundaries and breaking conventions with each new era. But while the official Disney princess lineup continues to grow and change, there's always one question lingering in the background. Who's next? With everything that we've seen so far through this list, I am definitely excited to see what the next entry will be. But hear me out. We could just add Kairi from Kingdom Hearts. Big Disney doesn't want me talking about this, but she's already a princess, and like the whole point of her story is that she's one of the 7 princesses of heart, and sure, she might not be a purely Disney original character, but let's be real, neither is Merida, so there's some precedent there. Plus, her story is deeply tied to the worlds of Disney, traveling between them, interacting with the characters like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. And look, I know people are gonna say, but Kairi doesn't really do much, and yeah, okay, she was kidnapped in Kingdom Hearts 1, and spent the whole game unconscious because her heart was literally inside Sora, and sure, Kingdom Hearts 2 wasn't much better. She got her own Keyblade only to be sidelined 5 minutes later. And yes, in Kingdom Hearts 3, they finally set her up for a big heroic moment only...
Bro, you good?
Sorry about that. I get a bit carried away sometimes. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you want to see in the next Disney princess. While you're at it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because I've got plenty more videos coming up, including why Donald Duck is secretly the most powerful sorcerer in the entire Disney universe. Please hear me out, guys.
Stop with the Kingdom Hearts.
Alright, well, maybe not. I guess the big boss doesn't want me doing it. But we will still have great stuff coming that I think you'll definitely like. With all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.